enormous task that any democracy faces to ensure free and fair elections. We take it for granted here in the West that we just assume naturally, of course, our elections are on the whole pretty free and fair. In reality, when you dig beneath the surface, of course, there are all sorts of bad actors, malign interests who are trying to interfere with that process. And of course, we've traditionally known about Russia and China, and that's reached mainstream news headlines for many years. The attempted foreign interference from I would say the traditional enemies. Certainly the traditional enemy going back to the Cold War was Russia, and then more recently with China. But of course we have this new entrant into this field, of course, is India. And again, India has obviously been interfering for quite some time at a very relatively low level. But its interference, certainly since 2014 and the rise of the BJP in the electoral system in India, that interference has really ramped up and has become so significant it's actually hitting mainstream news now. And it's also starting to impact the policy-making decisions of not just governments, but of course their law enforcement agencies and intelligence agencies. They're now having to devote actual time and resources to tackling not only China and Russia's interference, but now India's interference. There's no ambiguity there. It is happening. They've identified it. These inquiries have uncovered it. So it's such a big area, and it covers so many different nuances. As I say, on the face of it, we'll take for granted our democracy, but when you do look in detail at just what is going on below the surface, it's quite concerning. And let's just quickly jump to the video clip that you showed there, James. And we have a typical Indian news outlet. It is a Godi news outlet. It's spouting the Modi narrative, the BJP narrative, and of course it always has its agenda. It's pro-Modi. It's anti anything that stands up against the Hindutva RSS alliance, and of course the Brahmanical rule of India. So, but it does pick on Canada rather a lot, and particularly obviously since Trudeau stood up last year. And in fact, actually more than last year. It was 2 years ago now, well, a year and a half ago.
Almost, yes.
Gosh, how time flies. And but it's picking on Canada rather disproportionately. And one has to sort of really ask the question: why on earth is India, one of the rising nations, one of the rising superpowers of the world, picking on what is, I suppose, relatively speaking, with all due respect to Canada, a relatively small nation? And it is actually, I think it speaks volumes for what Canada stands for, and it speaks volumes about the Sikh community once again. Because, as I've often said, why on earth are the ruling elite of India, and by that read obviously the RSS and the Brahmanical elite of India, why are they so obsessed with the Sikh community?